Welcome back to the Cream City Club podcast. I am Spencer Michaelis, and I'm here again with Gunnar Amelunk. Gunnar, how are you doing this fine Monday evening?
I'm good. If I'm out of breath, it's because I just ran on the treadmill for literally no reason. I just keep working out. It's not like a New Year's thing, but I don't know what's gotten into me where I start to like run for fun now. But maybe you should try it, Spencer, if you want to get like
Absolutely not.
me. But I'm
Absolutely
literally dying.
not. I no. I will work out, but I am not running. I will.
Yeah,
I'm fine lifting. Running is out of the question. I need a game. Like I'll go play basketball with you, and I'll run then. But I am
yeah,
not
I know. I
running.
don't know how people do it for fun. That's
I
just insane to me. But
Yeah, it's some sort of
whatever.
disease, I think. No, yeah, we I mean it could be a New Year's resolution, I suppose. Is this our first? No, we did a Bucks one. We did a Bucks one since the beginning.
Yeah,
All right. Well, before we get more off track, if you are listening and you haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you are listening on, and please be sure to rate us 5 stars if we earn it, but hopefully we do. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on all of these episode releases. If you're listening and I'm asking for questions, I would love for some questions. We haven't gotten hardly any questions lately. Like if you guys have any questions for it doesn't have to be related to like anything we plan to talk about. We're happy to jump into some other things, but that's a little sidetrack there. But if you have questions for us, we're happy to answer them. Um, Today's episode is going to be focused on the Brewers, and mainly we're going to talk about a couple of the transactions that went down over the course of the last, I guess, couple weeks, maybe it was. So just to kind of dive into that, I guess the biggest one that actually happened was the Brewers made a trade with the Dodgers. Corbin Burns not involved in it like many had hoped. If if I were like the people breaking trades, I would have immediately tweeted Brewers and Dodgers have reached agreement on a trade just to cause any hysteria I could. But Robert Murray decided, wait, he might have done that actually, or he just said the Brewers had. I don't know. I would have done that. I would have wanted people to go nuts thinking it was like some fun trade, and really in the end, it was for a left-handed reliever who had been DFA'd in the last couple of weeks. So um, the Brewers acquired Bryan Hudson, as I said, a lefty reliever drafted in 2015 by the Cubs, 6'8" dude, really big guy. Um, Talk a little bit more about him in a second, but what they gave up was their 20th round selection in last year's draft. Another left-handed pitcher, actually, Justin Chambers, out of a high school in Arizona. He was coming off Tommy John, so he had been rehabbing that, and we hadn't really seen him pitch professionally, and really we didn't get a senior year from him either. So, in terms of available data, what we had on Chambers was his fastball was kind of touching 90, maybe a little bit above at times. Big, kind of loopy curveball, pretty solid changeup, and a slider that he mixed in that there really wasn't much data on. Um, Frankly, it's a little surprising the Brewers were willing to give him up as quickly as they did. Um, 20th round pick, they gave him over $500,000 in a signing bonus, which was actually the highest of any of those 11 through 20 picks. I think some Dodger fans read into that as meaning Brewers viewed him as their best pick from that range. And it could be. It's not out of the question that that's why they gave him that much money, but there's a lot of reasons that you can give people this type of money. It could have been that that's what it took to sign him, and that's what they had left over, so they gave it to him. Other people were signing for less, so why give them that much if they don't need to? Um, a guy who's kind of rehabbing an injury probably feels like he has a pretty good chance of coming back and potentially making a lot more money by going to school, showing what he can do, developing at college. So you might just have to give him a little bit more money to get him to sign in the end. Um, I think the fact that the Brewers were willing to move him isn't really a knock on him either. I think it's just, I tweeted this after the Jake Bauers deal. The Brewers have so much more depth in the system than they've had before that people that you recognize are more likely to get traded now. And I think people follow prospects more. People are more interested in it. And the fact that the Brewers have built a better system just makes it more likely you're going to recognize a name when it gets moved. So if you told me in 2030 that Justin Chambers was actually a pretty good pitcher, like that wouldn't shock me. But this is a long time down the road that we're going to find out what he is. And for the Brewers, they get a guy that they have a lot of interest in. And I guess, just dive into that quickly. So Hudson, like I said, lefty, 6'8". He comes from kind of a sidearm slot, so he doesn't come. A lot of tall pitchers tend to come over the top because it gives them this really weird angle working down. He comes from pretty straight sidearm, and he gets insane extension, like it would be tops in baseball and MLB, pretty close to the top. Um, he's only sitting like 92, 94 with the fastball for the most part, but he can get it up to 96, and with that extension, it looks more like 94 to 98 to hitters. The issue with him at the moment is a secondary pitch. So he threw his fastball almost 80% of the time in AAA. Worked really well. He got great results in AAA. Whiffs on 30% of swings almost. Um, and he struck out 35.5% of the batters he faced in AAA. So he had really, really good results in AAA. When he got to the majors in a really small sample, hitters could still kind of square up the fastball from time to time. He had some walk issues. I wouldn't read too much into the major league numbers. The AAA numbers are what are going to be more important for him, but he throws a mid 80s cutter and he throws like a sweeping, like a sweeper, really is what everyone's calling him now, but a sweeping slider. But he will sometimes use the slider as a put away pitch, but he likes to go to the fastball. It's mostly a fastball. If the Brewers can figure out how to make one of those other pitches effective, I think there's a pretty good chance he's a very, very helpful arm for the Brewers this year. And even if he's majority fastball, it could help. So, Gunnar, I've talked almost the entirety of the start of the podcast. I'm guessing you don't have too many thoughts on this. This isn't you're not a big pitcher guy.
Yeah,
Just
but you
anything.
touched on what I wanted to touch on. I made this the main notes I had was that he's 6'8", which is a monster on the mound, and then obviously the extension that he gets. Um, he doesn't throw as hard as you probably think he would, but with that extension, I mean, it plays really well. And then I was just going to ask you why that strikeout number kind of jumped up in the minors the last few years, but you kind of answered that. So, I guess if he works out, I mean, lefty bullpen pitchers are pretty hard to come by. So I imagine that's also why, if, like you said, if people recognize the name that we traded, he's not like a huge, like, top prospect guy, but I mean, you got to give up something to get something. And we feel like we got something in a lefty bullpen guy that we could pair with Milner. I think that's the value there. I think is going to outweigh whatever he ends up being if he even ends up being anything. So,
Right. Yeah, and Hudson does have two options remaining, so he can be moved up and down,
yep.
which is very rare right now for the Brewers' options in the bullpen. So having options is going to give him a lot of he's probably going to get a lot of opportunities to kind of come up and down when injuries happen, or like you said, right now Hobie Milner's kind of the only lefty in the bullpen going into the season. So having another guy who can come up and at least help out if Hobie's workload gets too big or whatever, it'll be there's a pretty good chance he's a pretty helpful pitcher for the Brewers this year, and Chambers could be a good player, but it's a long way away from knowing, and the likelihood of it is pretty small. But I'll be rooting for him. I've seen him on social media and stuff since he was rehabbing his elbow. Seems like a good guy, working hard to get back. So yeah, I hope he does well. I either way, this is not going to kill the Brewers at any point down the road. So little risk, some pretty decent reward to the deal. So moving forward to a deal that people probably recognize this name a lot more, but he ended up being a minor league signing. The Brewers signed Austin Nola, brother of Aaron Nola, but the catcher who has spent the last few years with the Padres, had a really good 2020 with the Mariners, signed him to a minor league deal. It's interesting, Gunnar, because when I look at it, I kind of think that they signed Eric Haase to a major league deal. I kind of view it as Nola being more likely to take that backup position, but I know you kind of look at the other way. So what are your thoughts on Haase versus Nola?
Yeah, we kind of disrespected him last episode with Haase because I hopped off the pod and I'm like, oh my God, we forgot to talk about him. But I mean, you kind of called me out too because I said, well, I like Haase because he's a nice athlete behind the plate. And I think just his, and you said that Nola obviously is a good athlete too before those injuries. So I guess there's the concern factor to me. I think it might be a little bit higher with Nola just because of the injuries. And then I forgot what it was. Wasn't it like a couple of things, right? Because I know he got
Yeah,
wrist or something too.
he had an well, yeah, he had a wrist injury and a knee injury in 2022. Then he had a concussion early in 2023, and when he came back, he had the issue that Anthony Rizzo ended up having. which is that his eyes couldn't focus
Oh
on the
yeah,
ball anymore. So he just completely fell apart at the plate at that point.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it was interesting, actually. Quick side tangent, but I saw Jack Stern tweeted out an article about that, and he said that when Rizzo went on the IL finally and said that he was having these issues, he was like, "That's exactly how I've been feeling," and that's when he discovered that this was the issue. It sounds like
Hmm.
neither of them could really tell that they were that far off, but when they got their eyes checked, it was like, "Oh, that's not how it's supposed to be."
Yeah,
Um, so that's got to be a weird feeling as someone who obviously we were
the
hitters in
catcher
college.
too. It's kind of scary
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you can't see the ball straight.
right, right. I mean, you got a little more room for error with your glove than you do, but it's a broken
Yeah,
thumb waiting to happen or something. Yeah,
yeah.
so that's what he's coming off of.
Yeah. So then, but I think just the funny thing is that they both never really had a great sample in the big leagues. I know Nola got a later start in his career, and then Haase's never really, he's been like a backup-ish guy, so he's had like 200, 300 at bats even in his best seasons. But I think the hitting profile I think intrigues me slightly more with Haase from obviously a couple years ago. Last year was really bad. So I guess we're like splitting hairs because if we're going to be fighting over the backup catcher spot, who might just be sitting in there waiting for Jefferson to come up or something later in the year. So I mean, we can argue about it if you want, but also I just I don't know. It's but to what your point of what you said, I actually as far as the major league deal versus the minor league deal, you're right. I actually would have thought that would have been flipped based on like just the resume alone. But like the injury scare maybe is probably why we might have got away with that, and I guess less risk there. But yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, Nola's kind of 3 years removed from even being decent now, and Hase's
Mhm.
kind of 2 years removed. So the track record recently kind of favors Haase. It's not like it's great for either of them, but
Yeah.
um, I just think for me, Nola's he's always been a really low whiff, really low chase, really low strikeout, decent walk guy who before these injuries in 2020 had a pretty good batted ball metrics. 2021 was not good. 2022's batted ball stuff actually looks okay. It's not great, but it's not terrible. Um, it just makes me wonder if they think he's healthy, if he's seeing the ball normally again. I could see him, like you said. I think it's just more surprising to me that he's the one who got the minor league deal and that Haase got the major league one. But both of them have work to do defensively. Both have Nola used to be decent defensively, so I don't know if maybe like we were talking about, maybe the eye stuff was messing with him on the defensive end. The injuries definitely could mess with someone on the defensive end. So I don't know. I one of our uh one of our old teammates, Noah Schrieffer, is a big Padres fan, and when I tweeted out that Austin Nola was at least decent depth, he was like, I don't know about that if it's even decent depth, but I think it is. I mean, for a minor league deal to get somebody who has a track record and you could at least hope that he's going to be healthy and all of a sudden at least get back closer to what he showed in some of his best years. I'll take
Mhm.
that chance anytime. There's no such thing as a bad minor league deal in that regard. So anything else you have on either of those two?
No. Did you say that Haase he's got minor league options left too, or no?
I don't think he does.
Yeah, I didn't think so
I
either.
don't think he
That might
does.
be why too that we signed it that way, but
Yeah, well, either Nola wouldn't either, but if you sign him to a minor league deal, you're allowed to keep him in the minors until
that
you
yeah, that's what I mean. Like you got to stick them there. But
yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, I'm guessing Nola's deal probably has an opt-out date of some sort. If he doesn't get called up, he can choose to opt out and leave. That's usually
Hmm.
how those work for guys who at least have a track record like he does. Um, but yeah,
It's
it'll
gonna
be
be a
interesting to.
WWE showdown in spring training this year then. Watch out for the backup catcher role.
Oh yeah, they signed a lot of catchers the last few days. We'll get into a couple of the smaller ones later, but um, yeah, it's I don't know. I don't mind it. I wasn't a big Victor Caratini guy. I think a lot of Brewer fans really liked him.
Corbin loved him. That's what mattered.
Yeah, I know Corbin loved him. I know that Corbin loved him. Um, no, he just didn't call a very good game to me, and I always had issues with the way he called a game. So, as a backup catcher, that's almost one of the most important things to me is that you can just come in and take control of a game and handle that part of it. And anything you do with the bat, or I mean, the glove is to me the glove and calling a game is more important for a backup catcher than the bat because you're playing once a week probably, and you can hit eighth and you can get by, but you just need to not screw things up for the defensive side of the ball. So hopefully these guys can do that. I have no idea how either of them call a game. They both have work to do defensively, so who knows? We'll see what happens. Like you said, Jefferson Carroll could take that spot by May if they're both struggling terribly and he's having a good start to AAA. So backup catcher talk, we've probably spent more time than we ever should have on that. But speaking of kind of former, a player who used to be pretty good and had a really solid second half for the Brewers last year. Um, Robert Murray reported the other day that the Brewers have had conversations with Carlos Santana again, kind of on about a reunion. Um, I believe the Mariners, I can't remember. Mariners and one other team were definitely mentioned as well by Ken Rosenthal. I guess, what do you think, Gunnar? Is Santana a worthwhile acquisition? Not really an acquisition, a guy to bring back to the team and add to this lineup for 2024?
Yeah, I think we sort of the same concept. I think he has a solid floor and just maybe just like a nice placeholder at the this is like worst case, I feel like for him is just until we can get up like Wilkin or Tyler Black or somebody and or somebody else that we're not even thinking of in a trade or something. I think he could probably do a lot worse with a guy who's just placeholding because he did a really nice job last year. I guess for me, I would just be more concerned with I think he got a little not lucky is the wrong word for power, I guess, because power is power. I mean, you hit 23 home runs, so I mean, he did it. But I think to rely on that again with him, I think is probably not the best way to go. But I mean, he didn't whiff much, he didn't chase much, didn't strike out much. He walked at a good rate, so I mean, that's kind of where that floor comes in. I think you could probably do worse in that aspect, but I don't know. I just think the power is probably what's concerning for me. But like I said, no harm, no foul here, and the other aspect to this too is as of right now, we got a pretty young team. And I think him just being a nice clubhouse guy at the very, very least means a lot and goes a long way. And I mean, yeah, he's older. What is he like 38? So, uh, compared to everybody else on the roster, I mean, Yelich may even be the next young or oldest guy, and then there's probably another gap in there too, based on the roster right now. So, um, he got along with our guys great too, and um, it's being able to have a guy, like you said, where he was on the team last year and everything, just can't really hurt. You're muted, Spencer. Yeah.
I know. He'll be 38 um right at the beginning of the season, early April. So yeah, he'll be 38 for pretty much the whole season. Um I agree with what you said. I think there is a value to having him as a vet type of guy. I think a lot of teams have valued him in that way lately. Um and like you said, I don't know that you're getting 23 homers, but I think you're probably, with the way he can draw walks, he's a patient hitter. I think you're probably pretty much guaranteed to get close to a league average bat overall. And given there's a lot of question marks around the lineup, I feel like that's a guy that is worthwhile to add. As obviously the price has to be somewhat reasonable. You can't go crazy for a guy like that,
Yeah.
but I would expect it to be. So I think he's a worthwhile add. I don't know. I know PECOTA actually, which we're going to talk about in a second here, but PECOTA actually had a pretty decent projections for him this year. Like his 50th percentile was still a 711 OPS, and his 90th was a 780 OPS. So they still have pretty big belief in him as a hitter. Um, I don't know. I think it's worthwhile as long as it's not breaking the bank. And like you said, it's not going to hopefully block anybody that ends up earning their way into that spot, like potentially a Wilkin, or if that's the only position Tyler Black can handle in the end, which we probably have to find out at the major league level a little bit. But yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to doing it. I don't think I'm going to be leaping up and down every time if for hours at a time when I hear that they re-signed him, but I'm not going to be upset either. So um
He also
yeah,
had good defense too, which I should mention because I mean, for being an
yeah,
older guy too, I mean, obviously you don't need a great arm or you don't have to be fast, but he actually had pretty good range over there and he saved a lot. So,
yeah.
um,
Compared to what we saw with Rowdy, that was
yeah,
nice.
that just alone that was a plus just off of
Yeah,
that. Whether or not the hitting actually was there, but it was there for when he was here. So,
right. Okay. Yeah, I mentioned PECOTA. I think what we're gonna do here is we're not gonna go through too much of the actual PECOTA projections. For those who don't know what PECOTA is, First of all, it stands for Player Empirical Comparison and Optimization Test Algorithm. It is a baseball prospectus um, analytic, I guess you would call it, a projection system. They put out every year. They put it out, and the actual sheet has kind of like first percentile outcomes, which is like worst case, absolute worst case scenario, 50th percentile outcomes, which is like kind of what they actually expect to happen. And then it goes up to 99th percentile, which is like this is probably pretty close to best case scenario, what you're going to get out of them. And it's based on all this math and stuff that nobody knows because it's proprietary information, but um, I don't know exactly how it works. They've done a pretty good job. They're normally pretty accurate. Obviously, no projection system is going to be perfect. There's breakouts that, especially an algorithm, wouldn't be able to account for. Um, but they do a pretty good job, and they're usually one of the highest on the Brewers' record, I would say, which they do. They haven't put that stuff out yet, but a lot of times they've gotten a lot of flack for having the Brewers winning the division while everyone else was picking everybody else, and then the Brewers go out and win the division. So they do a pretty good job with this stuff. Um, I think what we're going to do, Gunners, we're just going to pick three guys that we want to kind of project ourselves, and then we'll compare it to how I can bring up the PECOTA stuff for these guys, and we'll talk about how they view it. But we'll do a pitcher, position player, and then a wild card so we can pick position player, pitcher, whatever we want to pick. I think we'll start with pitcher. So why don't you give your first pick on the pitching side?
Yep. So to be clear, we're not picking the best pitcher available on
No.
the Brewers. We're just picking a guy that I don't know if that would waver much from the what you talked about PECOTA stats, but just somebody I think is kind of important. And so I'm going to pick Aaron Ashby. I think we haven't done a great job of mentioning him probably in this podcast, but and for good reason. I mean, he didn't play at all last year. There's huge concerns with him. Um, just having all the concerns or question marks that is with the rotation right now. If you can get uh really what they think is going to be out of him, I would take that in a heartbeat just because there is a lot of question marks with him. And there was a quote I was trying to find of what was our latest update on Aaron Ashby. And Matt Arnold did update us early December, I think it was. And he said he's tracking along good, and has the chance to be part of our rotation. So if that's the case and he is in our rotation, I would take that 100 times out of 100 just because thinking about who we lost and everything like that. Um, I kind of view him as sort of, again, we don't know what his stuff necessarily looks like. I have to go off of what I last saw versus a little bit of take it back a couple steps and be a little realistic with what he might be. But he kind of reminds me a little bit of Adrian Hauser's a bad kind of thing, like to sort of compare him to, but as far as stats go, I think I could kind of see that where they kind of have him at best case scenario, a guy who is striking out about 10 guys per nine, like a 3.5 ERA, which I don't, that's a little aggressive to me. I think if we get a 3.5 ERA out of a starter and that's our fourth starter, I would take that every day of the week. It could be a huge game changer for us and a huge swing in our rotation, whether or not who's in it and who's out of it. And I think worst case too, he did talk about him obviously in our rotation, but he's always been a guy too I always thought might work well in the bullpen in an absolute worst case scenario too. And kind of in a sort of haterish type of role, I would probably prefer if he is healthy because that would be kind of fun. And I guess a lot of it just depends on health at the end of the day, but he's a really exciting arm. And again, somebody that we've ignored a little bit in this podcast. We've even said, oh my God, we forgot about Aaron Ashby talking about him. But probably better off because we don't want to get our hopes up too high or anything. But I'll be interested to see how he is in like spring training and stuff if he is ready to go. So
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm going to watch every spring training game that I can, like I always do. But if I'm actually looking for something specific, I'm going to be looking at Ashby and seeing how his stuff looks, seeing what the velo readings are. In spring, I don't care that much about velocity. Like it's usually down for guys. But when he came back for the T-Rats and made a couple of those rehab starts, I mean, it was like mid to high 80s at times. That wouldn't play. He's going to need
nope.
to be at least low to mid 90s. I mean, the way his stuff moves, I think he could get by just fine at that spot velocity wise. It'd be most ideal if he gets back up to, possibly up into the upper 90s like he was at times.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
He's locked up too, right? He's got a for sure next year or this year, next year, and I think it's like two options, I think it is, right?
yeah, it's got to be at
Team
least that.
options.
It's got to be
Yeah.
because it bought out 2 years of free agency, and I don't think he would be hitting free agency anytime soon, even if
Yeah.
he. So yeah, he's probably locked up through like the same amount as Yelich or like a year shorter than that, I would guess.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, he's definitely one we haven't talked much about for the reasons you laid out. But I guess just to give the 50th percentile projection that PECOTA had, like you said, almost 10 strikeouts per nine and a 4.26 ERA in that regard. Like even that would be a pretty solid back end starter. You'll take that almost any time, um, especially when you consider that he's coming off this injury. He's probably a year behind. You'd be really happy with that. The only issue with PECOTA is that it has no idea he's coming off that injury. It's
Yeah.
not factoring that in. So um, it doesn't know that. So I mean, the projection would be great. I'm not sure I would be as high on it as they are, but you never know. Um, I'll go with my pitcher then. So I took Abner Uribe. He came up beginning of July, I want to say. It was like that Cubs series right before the All-Star break. Um, you see the stuff. I mean, everybody who watches him can see the stuff. He's got a nasty slider, a nasty sinker. He can throw a four seam up in the zone and get strikeout or get whiffs with that. I guess the thing for me that's going to be super interesting is our hitters going to be a little more likely to just take pitches against him this year and make him throw strikes. Um, I kind of wonder. I know for a while teams did that with Devin to start the 2022 season, and he struggled with it, and then he found it in April when he started throwing the fastball a little bit more, started landing changeups. But I'm curious what they're going to do with Abner. They are projecting almost 6 walks per nine, um, which is a lot. It's a ton of walks. He, I honestly, if I were projecting, I would say more like 4.5 to 5 sounds right to me, where it's doable. It's something you can get through. 6 is hard. 6 is a lot of walks, and not many pitchers can survive at that. Now he has the stuff to strike guys out, and he has ground ball stuff, so it gives him an opportunity to get through that. But if he is walking 6 per nine, I'm going to be a little concerned about him this season. Um, they project him to strike out almost 13 per nine. They project him to be an above average pitcher this year, but it's a 4.28 ERA in their 50th percentile. It is 3.47 in his 90th. Honestly, I would probably lean closer to the 90th projection, where I would say I'm thinking like 3.5 this year. And then if he can keep the walks limited, then I'm looking at Abner being a closer in the future, and I would expect it to go down significantly over time in terms of his ERA. Um, but yeah, what are your thoughts on Abner?
Yeah. I mean, I was gonna bring up that playoff series too. You talked about him getting a little bit wild and he got a little tested there and he kind of showed his emotion a little bit too much. I think that's sometimes where it can get I love those guys on the mound where they show their emotion, and that's kind of the prototypical type of guy like that because he gets heated and he throws 1,000 miles an hour and it could go anywhere at any moment. If I think we were at the game and we were saying like he might have got hyped up like right before he threw that wild pitch that scored the run, and we're like, he's gonna throw a wild pitch here, and then
Yep.
sure enough, he threw a wild pitch.
And then he came
Um,
back and punched the rubber on the mound. So
yeah. So if he can eliminate that, or somehow contain it a little bit more, I mean, Jeremy Jeffries was a kind of a guy like that. I mean, not even as good as stuff as that. I think Abner's got better stuff than him even. But just containing that and just limiting the walks. Um, I mean, the strikeouts they already predict, like you said, very high, but who knows, it could be higher. I don't even know if he can contain all that and actually bottle it up and have that control. He's just really exciting. Like, I mean, I always say I don't really recognize pitchers, but like you cannot not recognize him. He's just electric.
yeah, he's hard to miss. And like you said, it's his energy and enthusiasm and stuff is all good. And honestly, there's plenty of closers who have been kind of psychotic over the course of time. Like to be a closer, sometimes you kind of have to be. I think, like you said, for the most part, last year, he channeled it into good energy. I think you saw it in that extra innings game where Chafin walked a few people and then he came in and walked a bunch of people and lost the game. That was the first time you kind of had seen him blow up. I watched him a lot in the minors. He did that a lot in the minors. He would struggle. If he walked one guy, you would have trouble reining him back in. he had a much better approach and a much better ability to kind of let things go in the majors than I expected him to. So I hope that was a good sign. I kind of think it's a pretty good sign that he's going to be able to um, kind of channel that energy into positive energy. But he's going to have moments where he's going to be pissed off and he's going to have some blow ups. And I guarantee you're going to see him get thrown out of a game during the course of his time as a Brewer. Like you're going to see it. It might be for hitting somebody, it might be for screaming at an umpire. It's going to happen. So prepare yourself for it. But I think in terms of what he can add to the pen, I mean, it's a different level of stuff from everybody other than Devin, and it's a different type of stuff from what Devin has. So um, I'm just excited to see how he looks now that hitters have kind of gotten a taste for him. They know what his stuff, how his stuff moves. Like I said, I have a feeling they're going to be a little more patient and probably not as likely to go after early pitches that might be on the edges. So he's probably going to have some adjusting to do throughout the season, but it's he's just such a fun pitcher to watch. I mean, it was electric every time he was on the mound, all 3.5 months that he was with the team. So I think next we can move on to a position player. 3, 2, 1. So Gunnar, if you want to give us your position player that you chose.
Yeah, so this one's a little bit more obvious of a pick, and it's been well documented how I think this guy's probably a little bit better than he's shown with us outside of 2021, and that's Willy Adames. So they've got him at his best case scenario hitting like 30 home runs, 820 OPS, and the 30 home runs, I mean, can come and go. I would actually probably guess around 800 OPS for him in his better years. But that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say that I think he could be better than what he is. Um, Walks at a decent clip-ish, but I think what his floor is kind of keeps him is that he does have really good defense. So that always kind of keeps him in it. And I think there's even more room to even grow on defense sometimes. I think he just has lapses sometimes in stretches, which I mean happens throughout a baseball season. So it's not like crazy or anything, but I think he even has a little bit more to polish in that aspect even, and he's already really good at that. Um, but I'm just really excited about him, and we I'm trying to avoid the trade talks and everything. I would understand it if the package was right and everything, but I think they do have him projected as pretty much our best player in that scenario with William, offensively. And I think the worst case he was like second or something. I mean, again, obviously, I mean you got three guys you can pick from outside of the young guys, but just really excited about him. And I think his hitting profile honestly wasn't that great for like most of the year last year, but then he started to pick it up towards the end. So I think if we can get somewhere in the mix of 2021, I think is the max, but that's also a smaller sample size with just us. So I would somewhere in the middle of how he ended last year, in the middle of that, I think is honestly pretty realistic. And looking at even his best case scenario, like I said, it's an 820 OPS. I think that's very achievable for him. I would not be shocked at all if it's even better than that. So I think that one he could swing a lot because again, we could talk about who could replace him at shortstop. If you get in that and then you replace him with like a Bryce Turang, that's a massive drop off. So I personally hope that we keep him unless I'm blown away by an offer. But as far as it goes, if we do keep him in everything, he could easily be our best hitter next year. So I'm just excited about him. And like I said, the defense also gives him a nice floor. So yeah.
Yeah. I I think the way I would describe Willie is it feels like the Brewers go as Willie goes since he's been here. I mean, if you think about last year, what series did he get hot? It was that Rangers series. And what series did the Brewers just all of a sudden pretty much put away the division? That Rangers series, and then the next three when they went on their win streak. I don't, it was 9 or 10 or whatever it was.
Hmm.
Um, they just seem to he seems to kind of be the key to unlocking a lot of what they do offensively. And when he gets hot, a lot of the offense tends to get hot. I don't know. As an analytical person, I'm not super like that type of stuff is hard for me to wrap my head around because I don't know exactly why or what that is. And as somebody who played the game, I kind of understand it because I could kind of feel that when people are hitting around you, it just feels easier to keep hitting. And there's just really no way to describe it. But for him, it just has always felt like he's kind of the key to unlocking the offense. And if he, like you said, if he's an 820 guy, I would imagine that's going to be a much better offense in general in 2024 versus what it was in 2023. I will talk about somebody who is not as well, not as probably well liked or as well known. I mentioned it earlier, actually, the Jake Bauers trade when they gave up Jay Savina and Brian Sanchez to get him. Bauers is actually PECOTA likes him quite a bit, I would say. What do they have? His 50th percentile, they've got him as a 710 OPS, which is honestly, that's about what you've been getting from first base for the Brewers for a while anyway. It would be pretty close to kind of a league average-ish hitter at what they're almost expecting him to do. His 90th percentile, they have him at a 797 OPS. And if the Brewers get that out of Jake Bauers, 24 homers in that scenario, if they get that out of Jake Bauers, they're going to be in a really good spot. He's the thing is, I can see it happening because of the way he started hitting the ball with authority when he got to the Yankees. Really, he just started hitting the ball a lot harder. He started elevating his hard hit balls more often. He's going to strike out. It's going to be part of it. He takes walks. I just see him as somebody who I can see this type of projection actually playing out, whereas some of the other guys in their 90th percentile, like for example, right below him on the spreadsheet in the 90th percentile is Jesse Winker at a 794 OPS. I actually wouldn't hate Jesse Winker being brought back on like a minor league deal. I think there's a chance he could have a little bounce back, but I'd be pretty shocked if he put up 794 even with a bounce back. Like Bauers, I see as much more likely to do that. Josh Donaldson is in the same area with an 802 OPS. I could see that more than Winker, I'd say, because I don't think his bat speed's completely gone, but I would still be more surprised if he did it than Bauers. So I've talked myself into the Bauers deal more than I did originally. The more I've looked at it, perhaps that is just me being hopeful and thinking positively and being an optimist like I am often accused of. But I do try to look at things pretty openly and analytically, and just the fact that when people start hitting the ball harder, it tends to work out better for them as hitters. And he had a legitimate jump. It wasn't just, yeah, he hit the ball on average a mile per hour or two harder. Like, no, it was a 4 or 5 mile per hour jump. His 90th percentile exit velocity went up quite a bit. His max exit velo, I believe, was the hardest hit or highest of his career. It was a jump across the board. His barrel rate went up. His hard hit went up. Like I said, you're going to have to deal with strikeouts. It's going to be part of it, but he's going to walk. He's probably going to hit some homers. It's not quite as hitter friendly for a lefty as it is at Yankee Stadium, but Miller and Van Field. Oh, I almost did my own cardinal sin. I almost called it Miller Park. And Van Field is pretty decent for lefties. They can definitely use it as a launching pad of sorts for left-handed hitters. So I think they probably are overdoing a little bit on his 90th percentile, but if I were projecting like what I expect, it would be around 710 OPS, and that's what they're expecting too. So in a good season, you never know. Hit a couple more homers than I'm thinking, maybe strike out a little less, take a few more walks, all of a sudden you're close to an 800 OPS. So Gunnar, what are your thoughts on Bauers?
Yeah, we touched on him a little bit before in that original trade when it happened, but I think this sounds dumb too, but with a guy who doesn't play every day and when you can kind of nitpick his spots and put him in spots to succeed too, I think it's not at all impossible to envision a situation where he has like an 800 OPS because he's just crushing it in limited at bats, but we're putting him in spots to succeed constantly for a small amount of time. So it's not like he's going to play every day at first base, like I said. I mean, maybe in that situation then we'd try it, but and that's kind of when then he'll probably fall down and stuff. But yeah, I mean, a guy who hits the ball hard and walks, I mean, you got me intrigued. And it's a really good flyer. Probably if I had to nitpick a flyer to take on a hitter, it would be this type of profile. I mean, you're not going to get a perfect hitter at all. He's going to strike out a lot, like you said. If you can just cut that down a little bit and turn that into just some contact, for a guy who hits the ball that hard, you're going to see some good results. And like I said, when he's got such a small window to actually hit or just small at bats, you might catch a heater for a couple of weeks. And we could benefit from that.
Yeah, I'm I don't know. Like I said, I've talked myself into it, which is always that's usually when I'm wrong the most is when I don't trust my initial instinct. But you know what? I'm hopeful. Let's say we get a decent season out of him. It'd be a really
It's
big.
okay to be wrong on Jake Bowers. That's kind of my point here. Is he's not going to play every day. Like if he sucks, it's going to be a small sample anyway, so we can replace him easily.
I am still beating myself up for being so wrong about Javi Guerra. I'm not going to get over these smaller deals being wrong. Um, yeah, okay. Well, we've gone through our pitcher, our position player. Give me your wild card, whichever one you want to choose.
Yep. So I'm gonna go with a hitter, and I think this guy is a good wild card pick in general because he's another guy who could be in the limbo. He could be traded tomorrow, and I wouldn't be shocked. And I picked Garrett Mitchell, and we might have a little fight about this one, but I don't know. I think I'm gonna take all angles on this. So I think in general, people it's kind of weird because I think he's had good results and people do like him a lot. The fans do appreciate him a lot. And part of that is the timing where he came up because he was the one young guy in a team that was fighting for a playoff spot. And the whole kind of story looked really good and he played good and he had really big moments in that kind of stretch run. So I don't blame people at all for that. And I was excited too. And he was a guy too where me and you were both kind of hoping for the name to pop up as Sal Frelick was getting called up. And we're like, oh my God, Garrett Mitchell's the one who got called up. So this is not like I'm a huge Garrett Mitchell fan as far as like I'm obsessed with this guy and I knew he's always going to be good. Um, I think it was more of just that he's really surprised me when he's been up. And again, small sample, as small as you could probably get for something that we would have expected for a year and a month and a half or whatever it was. I mean, he's only got like probably less than 200 at bats, 150 or something, probably one somewhere in there. And I just think I'm aware of all of his concerns too and the strikeouts, again, not huge sample size. I think what intrigues me a little bit, I think, is he seems to have sort of like a power potential that I like, and he's hit the ball decently hard. He's got to get it up in the air. That's has he been able to do that for a great stretch? No. Um, but I think if he could just figure that small thing out, again, though it's kind of like a Jake Bowers thing. It's just such a high ceiling versus not a super high ceiling, but a higher ceiling. I could see him in a good year having a better year than like a Sal Frelick, but in a bad year, I could see him being a lot worse than Sal Frelick in his bad year. Like he's gonna have a lot higher floor, Sal would than him. But the athlete is legit. I think seeing how well he hustles all the time and everything, that's just a guy that you can respect at the end of the day. I mean, he hits ground balls, which is horrible, but if you're busting down the line and everything, it's like, oh wow, that's actually impressive. I like that. Um, and I think I like his presence too, and maybe that was part of the reason why he got called up when he did. And this is me kind of just making stuff up in my head. But he just seems like out of the bunch of like the young guys, he kind of has like a mature presence, and he's kind of the leader of that young group, which is nice to see. Um, and then I just kind of made a comparison here before I kind of break down his numbers, what I think he could do. I think in like a perfect Garrett Mitchell type of year, I'm kind of looking at like a Carl Crawford, but that's also like a perfect scenario. That I understand that's just like me being optimistic, but I think that's the type of player that we're looking at here where he's got power, but you're not going to see like 30 home runs type of power. I think he can kind of just spray it across the field. Um, I think another thing too with his swing, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. I just thought of this, but he does kind of have a funky swing where I like that he keeps the barrel in the zone and everything. Upper half, I love his swing, but the lower half, he kind of puts his foot in the bucket sometimes and kind of like steps out of kind of his space a little bit. But he's actually hit doing that. So I'm like confused. I'm like, well, I didn't expect that to actually be able to hit sometimes doing that. But then that's also probably why he kind of gambles a little bit, and that's where the strikeout numbers come in. So they've got him at, well, this is actually funny too. This is kind of where you can jump in because even in his best case scenario, they've got Bryce Turang is a better hitter than Garrett Mitchell next year. I believe they got him at around like a 670 OPS, and then they got Bryce Turang at like a
684.
684. Yep. So I wish there was like a FanDuel bet or something I could make. I would probably guess, even if I'm completely wrong about Garrett Mitchell, that I think he could be a better hitter than Bryce Turang. Um, but that's shocking. That's kind of what I mean, where I think it seems like people like him, but they're also so low on him at this point where I don't know if it's super fair. I kind of see like a Brett Phillips, like a worst case, where it's like, yeah, he's like a fourth outfielder and he can play, but I don't know. I just think it's just gotten a little bit too low, and I like Garrett Mitchell. I just kind of wanted to make that known. That's why I think it's a good wild card thing because I would not put my money on him being like this amazing hitter, but I just think the overall consensus might have gotten a little bit too low on him because I do like him and I am excited. It's just out of that bunch, yeah, he's probably the odd man out. So I'll toss it to you because I don't know if we've got any overlap there or anything, but I thought I
Yep.
was pretty fair.
No, you were. You were. Um, I will point out PECOTA is all based on like statistical algorithm. So it's not somebody just saying like, oh, we're low on Mitchell here. It is based on whatever their algorithm is. Um, my guess would be that the strikeout rate of near 40 is probably just really killing him. Um, but I think everything you said is pretty fair. I see Phillips as kind of what I would say is a pretty close to a floor as well. I think I told you that pretty early on. I was like, I could totally see him being Brett Phillips, and that would be not surprising to me at all. But I do think it's pretty close to a floor because the glove is fantastic. He's a very, very good defender, very, very fast. Like you said, he runs. I mean, like I've said a number of times, I'm a very analytical person when it comes to baseball, but I am also the thing I'm old school about is that I love people who run and run hard at all times. Like it, people who play hard at all times, people who are willing to dive or run into walls or sprint out a routine ground ball to second and beat it out, which we've seen him do. Like I have a ton of respect for him, the way he plays in that regard. I worry about the whole profile of him as a hitter just scares me. It's a bunch of grounders and a bunch of strikeouts just normally does not work out to be a good hitter. And he's going to turn some of those grounders into hits because of that speed and that hustle. And then he can steal some bases. So that gives him a little bit, that raises his floor a little bit just by naturally being able to add some extra value in that way. But like you said, he hits the ball hard. So if he can get the ball in the air, that power could come around. And you mentioned, like, yeah, he's not getting to 30, even at an absolute peak. But if he can start getting to the elevation a little bit more, like in a really, really good season for him, I could see him clipping 20. Um, I just think there's so much gap between his ceiling and his floor. You, other than Churio, I think I'll say this. I think Mitchell's pure ceiling is the second highest of all of these young guys, of all of them. Churio is the only person I would put with an actual straight up ceiling higher than Mitchell's. But I would say the gap between the floor and the ceiling is probably as big as anybody as well. And his floor is as low almost as most of these guys who are going to be in the majors. Like all of them can kind of take that same, well, we're going to be really good defenders, but we might not hit. Like all of them can kind of fit that mold. So I don't hate Garrett Mitchell. I know, like you said, some Brewer fans really, really love Mitchell. I'm not trying to be when I say stuff on Twitter about him, I'm not trying to be like a Debbie Downer on Garrett Mitchell. Like I like him, and like I said, I respect the way he plays a lot. It's just hard for me to see it as somebody who, yes, there is legit like all-star type ceiling, but nothing he does right now makes me think he's going to reach it. And if I saw more possibility for it, I would be much more inclined to say, yeah, let's make him and Churio those main guys, and let's move out Frelick, let's move out Weimer in a trade. I would move Weimer in a trade happily too if that comes up. But Mitchell and Weimer, I would be very open to moving just because they both are just really good defenders who I just don't know if the hitting's ever going to be there. And frankly, I think the fact that Weimer would face lefties more often, which is something the Brewers need a little bit more of. They have a lot of left-handed hitters. It just, to me, all of that kind of adds up to, I know we weren't even talking about this really, but like to me, that's why Mitchell's the guy I would be almost most willing to move outside of like a Terang, who I just don't believe in at all. But
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah,
But yeah,
you
I'll
got any
just throw
thoughts
one more
there?
tidbit. Yeah, I'll throw one more tidbit in there. All fair, by the way. I wondered too, just like your point of if we had a bigger sample and he was the guy, if I would be more scared of him. I think I'm like more optimistic because we have so many guys, and I feel like I have like a safety blanket almost. So it's just like, well, if he does suck, we got somebody else to put him in. But if we had to rely on him, I think I'd be very, very scared. Um, but yeah, I'm excited overall about him, and it's just gonna be a weird thing because if we have part of me hopes that we get like if we can keep Joey and him and kind of platoon them in a situation, even though right now, I mean that's not even really possible right now if you think about how the outfield looks. But if we had a situation like that where they could kind of just we can just kind of have them play a little bit more and we can figure out which one makes more sense. that would be nice. But again, I mean, time's ticking, unfortunately. And yeah,
Yeah, and I do think one thing that it, the small sample is a real thing, and like you said, like the counting stats look pretty solid for him. Both times when the 2022 season ended, he was struggling as that season was ending. When he got hurt in 2023, he was struggling as he got hurt. It just felt like he was right on the edge of everybody noticing all of these flaws both times. And that's why part of me is like, I don't know, man. I just feel like if he plays out another month, everybody is in the same vein of like, oh boy, okay, he's striking out 40%, he's grounding out, great defender, but is he really going to be able to do much other than be that Brett Phillips type? And and I should even say, like, there's value in Brett Phillips. Brett Phillips was able to be rostered on a Rays team that went to the World Series because of the defense and the base running and the attitude and the way he plays. Like, teams value that. And Mitchell will probably have a chance, unless he's terrible offensively, to stick around in the majors for a really, really long time based off of everything else. Or I guess I should say if he can't stay healthy, because that's obviously another concern with him. But yeah, I Mitchell's very polarizing, and I totally get why people are super interested in him and kind of enthralled by what he could be. I just I just have a really hard time seeing it ever coming out to what people are dreaming on. And I feel like there has to just be kind of a balance of yes, that is what you are hoping for, and that's what you could see if everything goes well. And then you got to weigh, and I'm not saying you, you did a good job weighing
it's
all of
fine.
it. I'm saying everybody, like, I want him to succeed, but it's really hard for me to believe that he's going to. So that's where I'm going to leave it. I don't want to
I'm gonna say
rip on
one
the
more
guy.
thing. I'm gonna say one more thing
Yep.
because I got a point here. I was looking up his stats, and I wonder if he's striking out a little bit more because he is trying to tap into that power a little bit more. And maybe you can say that because, or you can chime in a little bit more. But you look at his last year at UCLA, he struck out 3 times in 73 plate appearances, and he didn't hit for any power. He didn't have a home run. And then even the year before that, he had 41 in 290 plate appearances. So that's not even that crazy. Um, so I do wonder if it's him just trying to play with it a little bit because he does know that he hits ground balls, but obviously the results aren't great still. But if it's maybe him trying to figure it out and maybe that there's I'm not I guess I'm making a case now for which I didn't super want to, but I just maybe think that's why I just hope he had a bigger sample because if he did, we can for sure answer that question. It's just he hasn't had time to figure it out if he can actually somewhere get in the
Yeah.
middle of that anytime. But
Yeah. I will say that that is, I think, part of it. I would venture to say that that's at least playing a role in the strikeouts going up from college. I also think you see better stuff. You
yeah.
have a swing that's kind of got, like you said, it's got a better plane than it did when he was drafted, but it still sometimes to me looks like it's more he's got to catch the ball at the right point or he's really not, because that's what it's got to be part of
Mhm.
why he's hitting so many grounders. Um, I think I could see the strikeouts coming down, but like you said, I would worry then that that's going to mean that he's got no chance of getting to the power.
Mhm.
It almost just feels like there's some sort of overhaul needed, and I don't know enough about hitting to say what that would need to be. But when I watch him, it just doesn't quite seem right, and then these numbers don't really or kind of back that up. But I actually think there's a ton of power in there. If he made a complete change and decided to go a different direction, maybe it would work because he hits the ball as hard as most people or as almost anybody. It's just the way he hits it hard doesn't usually work out. And
Yeah.
when he hits a home, like if you look at a home run swing, it's like, oh my God, yeah, this dude could really crush the ball. And then you look at most of the swings, it's like, okay, I get why he's not hitting home runs as often as you would think he might be able to. So I think that's the case with a lot of ground ball guys. When they tap into that power, it's like, oh, that looked pretty good. Duh, he hit a home run. Like he hit a home run, it's going to look pretty good no matter who it is. Unless it's like, Randy Johnson off Doug Davis or something. That didn't look good, but he hit a home run still. Uh, yeah, so we talked a lot about Mitchell, but we knew we were going to do that if one of us brought it up. So um, I'll talk about one of your favorite guys then for my wild card. So and mine. I love him too, but Tyler Black. I'm going with Tyler Black. And I chose him similarly as a wild card because I do think not for the same reasons. I think he's kind of a wild card for the Brewers this year. if his bat can come up and play anywhere close to what it has played in the minors, it's going to be a really, really big deal for the Brewers lineup and what they're able to do this year. I will say PECOTA has them quite a bit higher than most rookies are projected to be. They have his 50th percentile outcome is a 704 OPS and a league average deserved runs created plus. They don't do that for too many rookies. It doesn't normally work out that way. So the fact that they view him high enough to have him up that high, that says a lot about what their algorithms think of him. Going off of everything else that we've talked about with Black, going back to the podcast of the prospect podcast that we did, and we've brought him up multiple times. I think that the bat is, and you do too, I know, it's very real. I think the bat can be, now, do I think he's ever going to be like a 900 OPS type hitter? No. But I think he's a guy who could easily be a consistent around 800 OPS guy in the majors with stolen bases on top of it, with some home run power, with some gap to gap. Like I said, the base running part comes with it. Somebody who hits close to 800 and is a good base runner, or 800 OPS and is a good base runner, is extremely valuable. It might not ever show up in WAR as much as you would think if he can't play defense, which is still going to be the concern, and we've touched on that a number of times. But I think he's going to at least be able to hold his own over there where it's not going to hurt him a ton in terms of value. I'm just very excited. Unless the Brewers pull off a trade or sign a third baseman, to me he should be the third baseman on opening day with the current roster construction. I just don't know who you would play. I don't want to watch. Andrew Monasterio last year did a ton for the Brewers, and he's a fine utility player who can help the Brewers again this year. But I do not want to watch him and Bryce Terang both be in the lineup every day. I can't do that again. They got to have somebody who can bring a little bit with the bat at one of those spots. And to me, that's going to be Black. And I hope he makes the opening day roster, unless he has a terrible spring or he's hurt or something. To me, he should make their opening day roster. So I'm sure you have thoughts on Black. We've already talked about him, like I said, but what do you got?
Yeah, I won't go too deep, but as far as the stats go, they projected, it's hard being a rookie too, because there's no stat to that, so you can project that. I mean, if you're getting that out of a rookie, I mean, he's a rookie of the year candidate already. But I think why I like him just quickly, I think he's just a good mix of like literally everything we just talked about. He's got that Mitchell power ceiling, he's got the Sal floor. He walks better than any of those guys, and he's just kind of put it all together already. And then at a position that we've needed for a while too at third base, like you said, I mean, if you can lock that in, and he can actually just be an average third baseman on top of that, super, super valuable. And like you've mentioned too, I mean, we had Andrew there playing last year, then Josh Donaldson. So if you can have like an 800 OPS player that you can just plug in at third base, that's a massive, massive upgrade. And yeah, I mean, I didn't hate Andrew either, but I thought he was lucky. I mean, you can never really tell luck, but he was one of those guys where I think he just kind of caught a nice little stretch where he got some hits.
Yeah,
And then,
he played above his abilities for like a month, and
yeah,
then he was still a fine utility player after that, but he was
right.
not the
Yeah.
guy that everyone kind of fell in love with for the first month he was up.
Yeah. He's not the answer at third base, I guess is what I'm saying. So if we can find that answer on opening day, what, like we said, what he should be, I'll be very excited. So, like I said, it's just hard for a rookie. I mean, that's a very high bar to set for a guy. But also I could see him being probably better than that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just how excited I am about him.
Yeah. I think that's so just to give everybody what I mean, we didn't want to go through all these PECOTA projections and talk about everybody or anything, but I think at least for the next couple episodes, we'll probably do something similar with a few different players.
Mhm.
It's PECOTA and every projection system, like I said, none of it's going to be perfect. They do a good job. It's a fun thing to talk about. At the end of the year, it's going to be nothing what they projected for these people. It's only going to matter what they actually put out on the field. But in the in the middle of winter, when we're possibly about to get a foot of snow tonight into tomorrow, I'm happy to talk about some PECOTA projections. So
Yeah.
talk about some baseball that way. Yeah, I think just a few other things of note. That Australian League, like I mentioned a few other times on different pods, Brewers have three different players down there. Taden Hall, a guy that I'm pretty high on as a hitter, hit his second professional home run the other day. He's up to basically an 800 OPS after a really, really rough start where he was in the 500s for the first like 3 weeks. He's walked 13 times. He has 18 strikeouts. He's pretty much going to be a close to even like ratio of strikeout to walk, which is part of why I like him. Sam Gardner, I told you last time, he had struck out like 24 per nine at that point. He is down to a just an awful 19.4 per nine now. Um, 20 innings pitched, no runs allowed. He's only given up 6 hits and he's walked six, and one of those was an intentional walk. So he has a .6 whip, a 0 ERA, and 19.4 strikeouts per nine. I would say he's probably too talented for the league that he's currently in right now, but it's a guy that you have to imagine is at least going to be at AA to start next year. And you could see if he can, you never know what kind of confidence this could give a guy either, but he has good stuff. A run like this could make him pretty interesting. And somebody, you never know. I wouldn't be shocked if you see him kind of in a major league spring training game at some point as somebody who gets a shot to one of those minor league call-ups. Guy gets a shot to throw an inning or two. And then the other three, or the other pitcher, is Brian Fitzpatrick. I've discussed him before. He's a guy they drafted a couple years ago. He's thrown 34 and two-thirds innings, 3.12 ERA, whip under .9, just under .9. He struck out almost 11 per nine and walked barely over 2 per nine. So also having very good results. I think that's mostly been the case when the Brewers have sent pitchers down there, that they've done really well. There are other minor league players down in this league, but it's also guys who have kind of flamed out of minor league baseball. So it's not shocking that they get good results. But for a guy like Gardner, especially, I mean, those type of results are still outliers. So whenever it's an outlier, it's still a big deal. And then a couple other small minor league signings. The Brewers have pretty much gone totally after catchers for the last couple weeks here. We talked about Nola on a minor league deal. They also signed Ramon Rodriguez, a guy who was in the Dodgers organization and now most recently was with Orioles. He got up to AAA last year. I watched, naturally, I went and I watched some of his, I watched a game that he caught in because I was bored and I saw that we signed him. So I watched him catch a game. He had a good arm. He moved well, received pretty well. Sounds like a guy, or he looks like a guy to me who has the makeup of like a backup catcher at the major league level. He'll have to hit probably better than he has, but this past season he did walk more than he struck out, so that's pretty interesting. He's shown some power in the past at times, so depth signing, but when you bring in depth and you can see a path to them possibly impacting the MLB team, I feel like that's always a worthwhile signing. They signed David Garcia, who was actually a really big international signing for the Rangers probably 8 years ago now. Also a catcher, but he's 24 years old still. He switch hitter. He's shown some pop from both sides, but he hasn't hit. The results are all like upper 600s OPSs for the last few years. But he's seen as kind of one of the best. He's a really, really good defender. The Rangers view him as one of the best defensive catchers in all of baseball. And he actually had a 40-man spot at one point. He got non-tendered after COVID, but they thought enough of him to protect him a few years ago from the Rule 5 draft. So he's a guy that it's kind of the same thing as Rodriguez. It's like, okay, yeah, if he can hit a little bit more, you can see a backup spot just because of the defense and the arm and everything else he brings. This one's not really a new signing, but it's a guy that they're bringing back, and they gave a non-roster invitee to spring training. Brian Navarretto, he was with the Sounds last year, and it's the same exact profile as these other guys. It's a really good defender. You hope the bat comes around a little bit more. He's older than the other ones. Before they made these Haase and Nola signings, he was probably the guy I would have expected to have, if they signed nobody at all, he would have been the guy I expected to be the backup catcher for the Brewers. I viewed him higher than like Peyton Henry last year. I think he was probably next in line. Actually, Navarretto was up on the travel squad for the playoffs. I saw him go out to catch a warm-up between innings at one point, and me being me noticed that it was Brian Navarretto and got excited that he was there. So I believe he's had like a few games in the majors for the Marlins or the Twins or something, but he's just, again, it's all solid catcher depth in the minors, and it's an important thing to have in the minors. Last baseball related one we're going to talk about here. Michael Brantley did retire the other day. Obviously, he never made it to the majors with the Brewers, but as the player to be named later in the CC trade, he had a pretty big role in the 2008 season in the end. So he had a great career. Really, really, it would have been nice if the at the time the Indians would have picked Taylor Green, as most people expected, as the player to be named later instead of Brantley, because you throw Brantley on that like 2011 team, that could have been a pretty nice outfield to have, and he may have helped a little bit over the years, over some of the rough years. But I think everyone would make that CC trade again if they could go back in time. So congrats to Brantley on a great career. Got a couple of rings with the Astros. Um,
Sure,
Always one
sure.
of those guys that was fun to watch hit. So
Yeah, you remember names like Brantley and Nelson Cruz and Lorenzo Cain even at one point, but then we brought him back. So they hurt, but also like you said, we got CC and I would not trade that for anything in the world. So if that's what it took, unfortunately, we'll do it. But yeah, he had a really, really solid career. And even a couple times later in like the 2010s, I remember we kind of were hoping that maybe we could sign him or something and have it come full
yeah,
circle like Lorenzo King because he was very helpful. He was always a good hitter, like
yeah,
literally never, even if the power kind of dipped off, he was just always solid. So, yeah, super good career.
yeah. I honestly would have been curious if the NL had a DH earlier on, if he would have been a guy
True.
that we
Yeah.
could have brought back, because the defense was not great, but or I should say later in the career, it was playable for most of his career until he got too old to move. Um, but yeah, great career for him. I think we also need to give a quick shout out to our former manager, Craig Counsell. It was probably a pretty tough day for him on Sunday, having to see his new hometown Chicago Bears lose to the Green Bay Packers. I mean, just rough. It was rough for him.
Yeah. You,
Um,
you hate to see that.
yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, we enjoyed it.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun. He we'll fine.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. So obviously we are a Bucks and Brewers focused podcast, but I think we do need to at least spend a couple minutes here and talk about the Packers and their season that they've had so far. Obviously, just clinched the playoff spot in week 18 against the Bears. Um, yeah, I think really we got to talk a little bit about Jordan Love. So what you got for me on Jordan Love?
Yeah, I mean, we got another one, Spencer, and it's nice to see. I joked with you a couple weeks ago. I'm like, if you just removed that Raiders game, what his stats actually would end up being and what it looks like. I mean, he ended up with a 96 passer rating, which I know isn't the end all be all for everything, but um, yeah, I mean, he's just looked great, and it seems like the bigger games too, he's been able to step up even on top of it, and with all the moving parts in the offense. Um, I don't know why I'm breaking this down like we always do for like a Brewers
No, I
fans
think we should.
podcast. Yeah, we'll go a couple minutes, but I think with all the moving parts and we got no Pro Bowlers or anything like that, Jaden Reed stepping up big in the second half where he's like a legit star now too, and then we haven't even seen Christian Watson really do, and he might come back I guess next week even, so we should be all fully healthy, ready to go next week, and I think looking forward to the playoffs. One, it's that was like we already did it. Like we made the
Yeah,
playoffs, and with your this young of a roster, I think I sent it to you where it's the youngest roster ever to make the playoffs. And I don't know how accurate that is. It's got to be. If it's not the truth, it's like top five. I think it is the truth though.
it is.
Um,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
it goes back to 1978 when they didn't keep track of ages of teams,
yeah,
but at that time you couldn't declare for the draft until you were a certain age. So I
right.
would be hard pressed to believe that there's been a younger team ever.
Since they've been wearing normal helmets, I think it's safe to say they've got the youngest team. But yeah, I mean, we're not in the bracket, I think, of the 49ers either. So I think we would have to face them in the NFC Championship, which I think is semi nice. And like I just said, I mean, it's going to be a win-win from here out. Like even if you win, awesome, that's perfect. And if you lose, we did what we were supposed to in that first season. So
Yeah. No, I agree. Like you said, I think we got another one, which is insane. It's unreal how lucky we've been as Packers fans to witness this type of quarterback play. I mean, we have never seen a bad quarterback other than like a few weeks of our lives. Like we
who was
got
the Badgers quarter? Oh, Scott Tolzien. But you know, he had some moments.
Tolzien was okay. I mean,
Yeah, he had some
Deshaun
moments.
Kaiser was bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, who was the UCLA guy? The one who was right before Kaiser as backup. I can't remember. I remember his college, but I don't remember his name. Um, we got a Seneca Wallace appearance at one point. That was rough.
Yeah, yeah,
But otherwise, I mean, it's been like 98% of our games that we've watched. Even Matt Flynn gets a start and goes absolutely nuts and earns himself a huge contract. Like we just don't ever have to watch bad QB play so far, and that's going to run out at some point. So I'm thankful it hasn't happened yet. But like you said, I mean, Reed looks like an absolute stud. I I think Dontavian Wicks is going to be. I could see him and Reed being the best two receivers, and that's not even a
Yeah.
knock on Watson or on Dobbs. I mean, I would expect those two to be better than Dobbs, honestly. But I like Dobbs. Dobbs would be a fantastic fourth receiver for any team to have.
Hmm.
You get a fun breakout from Bo Melton the last like half of the season when
I
he
was gonna
came up
say,
a few
yeah.
times, and like it's just I don't want this to become like for me ripping on Aaron Rodgers, but this was so much more fun to watch with the guys who seem to actually legitimately get along. It was fun to watch a quarterback and receivers who were not screaming at each other and not having issues with each other all the time. And it just seemed like they kept picking each other up. And it felt like the receivers wanted to do whatever they could for Love at any time because of the way he treated them and the way he was able to communicate with them. And it helps that they're all similar ages. I think that
Hmm.
was always a little overlooked with Rodgers is that, yeah, he's like 13 years older than these guys. Like they're not going to be as easy to relate, but um, I don't know. Yeah, like you said, it was fun to see them get in. They beat the Cowboys. You never know at that point, but
Hmm.
if they lose, I'm just not going to be heartbroken like I normally have been for a Packers playoff loss. Like it's just going to be awesome.
Yeah.
We had a great season. I feel really good about the future. I would still like to see Joe Barry gone after that game, but
I was gonna say to your point, they had a good stat too, small tangent before this game, how we literally had like almost the same exact stats as the team going into the last week of the playoffs or last week of the season. And it just feels so much different outside of I was gonna say Joe Barry is what we gotta worry about, unfortunately. But the offense feels so much better. It's just like the vibes are better. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I just feel a lot better than last season, even though it's pretty identical to last season outside of one game. I mean, you win last week, the last week last season, and it's a similar result, but it wouldn't feel nearly as good as this one felt. So yeah, I'm just excited for the future, and we get to potentially beat Mike McCarthy too. That's a small tidbit.
yeah. And I
Who's
have
not?
no issue
Yeah,
with McCarthy, but it wouldn't shock me if he did get fired if he lost that game. And it would be a little weird and funny in a kind of a sick way that the Packers fired him and then possibly got him fired if they
yeah,
do win this game. So, um, no, I'm just excited to watch the game. Like I said, it's going to be the probably the most. Well, I say I'm going to be calm during it. I'm still going to be all juiced up and I'm going to get upset about everything
of
during the
course.
game, but it'll be a lot
Yeah.
easier to have some perspective after the game if they do lose than it has been recently. So, yeah, we just wanted to touch on that a little bit because we don't normally talk about them, but it was a fun season. It's not
If
over
they
yet.
win, we'll talk about them again. If they lose, we will not mention it ever again
Yeah.
on this podcast.
Yes. Um, so that just is a great segue into our random brewers. Uh, no, Gunnar, why don't you go first with this one? Random brewer. We're moving on from Packers. We're back to Brewers to
Yep.
finish this out.
Back to normal, where I talk about somebody obscure in the Brewers. So I picked Corey Koski. I know you have maybe a small connection to him, um, but I just remember as a kid, I was excited that we got him because he was like a very, very solid hitter and a good hitter. I think he's on the Twins before we got him,
Yeah.
and I just remember I went to a lot of games, obviously, and when I was a kid. I don't read every news article. I don't fully understand, but I'm just like, why is Corey Kowski always on the big board of like he's injured? Like he's never here, but he's like, is he on our team? I'm not even sure what happened. Um, but yeah, I mean, I wish I had more memories of him actually hitting because he was a really good hitter. And I think he did have a solid stretch to start with us even too, before he even got hurt. So, um, yeah, I mean, that's really all. Like I said, I wish I had more memories of him, but I just know he was a good player. And it was just funny that literally every single game I look at the big board and they'd put like injury report and Corey Kowski 60 to ADL, and I'm like, when is he coming back? It's every single time. But yeah,
Yeah. I'm just gonna make a bad joke and just understand everybody this is a bad joke, but I think Corey Koski wishes he had more memories with the Brewers too, because he was yeah, the concussions really killed his career, unfortunately. He he like you said, he was a really solid player before he got to Milwaukee, and he was playing well until he had the concussion issues. And like you said, one of my just a tiny little story, one of my um, friends from like middle school was he had a house on Pewaukee Lake and it was right next to Corey Koski. So once in a while on the beach, he would be out there playing baseball with us, like on the like wiffle ball out there, and super nice guy. Um, Somebody that I mean, I don't know him or anything, but he was a really nice guy and just a it really sucked that he did have his career cut short because, like you said, he was in kind of in his prime at the time he came to the Brewers, and then he just wasn't able to ever stay healthy. So that's a good pick. Mine, I also have no memories of really, except that I know that this was my first favorite Brewer, and that is Alex Ochoa. Uh, it would have been his second time around. I was looking at his baseball reference today. He was with the Brewers in 1999. I was one at that time. I do not remember anything from when I was one, but in 2002, that's my first memories at all of the Brewers. And 23 was my favorite number, and he was number 23. So he was my favorite player. And I don't remember anything about him as a Brewer, as a player. I use him in Immaculate Grid a lot because I've looked at his baseball reference a lot over the years, but he's he actually had like a solid couple of years in the middle of it's a weird career because he had it was a small sample, but in 2000 with the Reds, he had a 964 OPS over 275 plate appearances, like a 964 OPS. And in 1999 with the Brewers, he had an 870 OPS over the course of 329 plate appearances. So if you combine that into 1 year, which is basically how many plate appearances it is, that's like a 600 plate appearance run where he had over a 900 OPS randomly at 27 and 28 years old. He
I
didn't
wonder
do
what that
great
could
with
have
the
been during that era if that was
it was during that era, but he was a small guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know he didn't hit a ton of home runs, but
No, he had 21 homers in those 2 seasons combined. Um, Granted, he never had that type of power after that, so you never know what's going on at that point. But um, no,
we
I
don't want
just
to put that on
remember
his jacket either, so I apologize for that. I was just making a joke.
we're not making accusations. It's just this is a joke. Um, but yeah, he just a guy that for some reason, I mean, I always think of Alex Ochoa when I think of like my first favorite player. And like I said, it was simply because I liked his number and the way it looked on his jersey. So that is my random Brewer. And unless you've got something else, Gunner, I think we can
Nope.
wrap this one up. All right. So if you are listening, again, please like, subscribe, uh, leave a comment, tell us we suck, tell us we're great. I don't know, say something to us. Um, we'd love to get some more questions. If anybody has questions for us, throw them out. It doesn't have to be when we ask for them. Like honestly, you could just tag us on a tweet, whatever you want to
Hmm.
do, and we'll try and fit them in where they make sense. Um, and you can do that at our Twitter account at the Cream City Pod. Please be sure to follow us on there. We're trying to be a little more active on there now that we're recording more regularly. I think we'll be more active again. And then, like always, feel free to leave feedback on how we can get better. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you probably later this week.
Yep. So